Shiva, Queen of Ice, is one of the core summons of the Final Fantasy franchise. Though she began as a low-level summon in her first appearance, her prominence has risen through the years, and she is now regarded as one of the most iconic summons. The mythological and historical inspirations for Shiva are extremely superficial. She shares her name with the Hindu god Shiva, who is one of the Trimurti. Ramuh represents creation, Vishnu represents preservation, and Shiva represents destruction. But beyond their names, the connection between the Final Fantasy summon and the Hindu deity are very weak. For one instance, the Hindu Shiva is usually ascribed as being a male, but he is able to merge with the deity Parvati to become a being who is half male, half female, while the Final Fantasy Shiva has consistently been a female in every depiction. Shiva is said to reside on Mount Kailash, a mountain in Tibet that is known in Tibetan Buddhism as Kangri Rinpoche, Precious Snow Mountain. Beyond these traits, there is no real connection between the Shiva of Final Fantasy and the Shiva of Hinduism. A plausible, if mundane, explanation for why they bear so little resemblance to each other: Shiva sounds like Shiva. There are many gods of ice, cold, and winter throughout religious and mythological texts, but none of them are strong candidates as a possible inspiration for Shiva. In Hinduism, the closest thing to a god of ice is Himavat, the father of Parvati, who is the personification of the Himalayan mountains and thus associated with cold. Shiva is universally depicted as a willowy female. She has blue skin, the exact tone varying, and long blue hair. She wears thin robes that conceal her breasts and groin, or sometimes is covered up by growths of ice, and also often has gloves and boots. She is sometimes depicted as arriving on the battlefield in a cocoon of ice that shatters to release her. Shiva's signature attack is Diamond Dust. Shiva summons a great gust of icy wind against her enemies, causing growths of ice to rise around them, which she shatters to deal damage. In some earlier titles, Diamond Dust was depicted more as a blizzard of snow or a barrage of ice crystals, and the depiction of Diamond Dust as cold wind forming ice around the enemy began in Final Fantasy VII and has persisted since. Shiva has a secondary recurring attack, Heavenly Strike, that first appeared in Final Fantasy X. The attack depicts Shiva conjuring a large shot of ice above her opponents that drops onto them. She is also occasionally associated with the attacks Absolute Zero and Icicle Impact, and generally is able to use ice attacks including the various tiers of blizzard spells. As the Summon of Ice, Shiva is sometimes grouped with Ramuh and Ifrit as an elemental trio representing lightning, fire, and ice. More specifically, she is often associated with Ifrit, either as a partner or more often a rival, due to their opposing elemental affinities. In Shiva's first appearance in Final Fantasy III, the game organized its summons by tiers, making Shiva the Tier 2 summon. She can be purchased in Repleto or Doga's village. Her three attacks are Mesmerize, which puts all enemies to sleep, Icy Stare, which deals ice damage to one enemy, and Diamond Dust, which inflicts ice damage to all enemies. In Final Fantasy IV, Shiva is one of 5 summons learned by Rydia automatically when she rejoins the party as an adult, and uses her Diamond Dust attack to deal ice elemental damage to all enemies. In some versions of the game, she is grouped with Ramuh, Ifrit, and Titan as a quartet of elemental summons. These 4 summons act as mini-bosses in Rydia's Lunar Trial, and are bosses fought in the Interlude chapter in the PSP port of the game. Lunar Shiva is the boss of Edward's Lunar Trial, where her ultimate attack is Ice Storm instead of Diamond Dust. In the sequel, The After Years, Shiva is stolen by the mysterious girl with the rest of Rydia's Eidolons, and the girl summons Shiva against Palom in his chapter and freezes him and Leonora solid. In the penultimate chapter, The Gathering, Rydia and her allies rescue Palom and Leonora and confront Shiva. If the player ceases attacking her while she is weakened, she comes to her senses and rejoins Rydia as an Eidolon again. Final Fantasy V marks the first time Shiva is fought as a boss. She is found in Castle Waltz, hidden in a waterfall in the back of the castle, and attacks with 3 ice commanders. While she is difficult to defeat the first time the party visits the castle, it is doable, making Shiva a powerful ally if she can be overcome. Shiva is a level 2 summon command and costs 10 MP to cast, and performs her Diamond Dust attack on all enemies. Final Fantasy VI is the first time Shiva is directly associated with Ifrit. The party observes them being thrown into a trash pile by Kefka in the Magitech research facility, and when they approach the espers, the two attack. Shiva and Ifrit swap in and out of the fight until one of them is defeated, when they recognize Ramuh's power with the party and stand down. Weakened to the point of death, the two turn into Magicite and entrust themselves to the party. Shiva's Magicite teaches Ice Elemental and MP damaging magic, and she uses Diamond Dust when summoned. In Final Fantasy VII, Shiva is gifted to the party by Priscilla after they defeat Bottom Swell in Junon, and thus is one of the earliest summons they acquire. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, Shiva is faced in a Shinra VR simulation battle, offered by Chadley in Sector 5, and he gives the player Shiva's summon materia if they defeat her. Shiva's attacks as a summon are Icicle Impact and Heavenly Strike, and she casts Diamond Dust when her summon gauge runs out. She also uses these attacks when fought as a boss. Shiva's loading screen mentions a legend of how she saved the planet in ancient times by freezing a great wound inflicted on it. This is a clear allusion to Genova's impact 2,000 years ago, implying Shiva is the one who iced over the northern crater and its surrounding environs. This story is unique to the remake continuity and not mentioned in any other compilation materials, so it is unknown if it is canon to them or not. Final Fantasy VIII is the first time Shiva and Ifrit are presented as rivals. She is one of the first two Guardian Forces the player receives at the start of the game, the other being Quetzalcoatl, and Ifrit reacts with fear if the player summons Shiva against him. Shiva is a more defensive Guardian Force, with junction abilities for strength, vitality, and spirit. Her Refine ability allows players to extract ice and water magic from items. Final Fantasy IX gives Shiva a backstory, through the writings on the Eidolon wall at the summoner village of Madain Sari. She is described as the first Eidolon, found as a young girl. The summoners of Madain Sari believed the Eidolons to be the accumulation of the memories of the planet's myths and legends, given physical form by the crystal, and Shiva's growth from a child to a young woman illustrated how shifting cultures could influence the appearance of an Eidolon. There is concept art of Shiva as a young girl, as well as a snow fairy, another form the Eidolon wall mentions she takes, but neither appears in-game. Garnet is technically able to summon Shiva when she joins the party, but is restricted by the high MP cost. All of her Eidolons have triple their normal costs until later in the game. But through level grinding, Garnet could hypothetically call Shiva normally. Otherwise, Shiva is extracted from Garnet along with the rest of her Eidolons by Queen Braun, and relearned through the Opal accessory later in the game. In Final Fantasy X, Shiva is the Aeon of Makalanya Temple, situated over a frozen lake. This is the first appearance of Shiva's Heavenly Strike ability, which is her unique attack. Her overdrive is Diamond Dust, and she is connected to Lulu's celestial weapon, the Onion Knight, which allows Shiva to break the damage cap when empowered. As with all of Yuna's Eidolons, Shiva can be faced as a boss summoned by Belgemine, and at the end of the game when the spirit of Yu Yevon possesses her. In the international versions, Dark Shiva guards the entrance to Makalanya Temple after the events at Bavel, and she must be defeated to enter the temple again. In Final Fantasy X-2, Lake Makalanya has unthawed and the temple sank beneath the surface. Like Yuna's other Aeons, Shiva has been possessed by the spirit of Shuyin, but because Makalanya Temple is no longer accessible, she has not fought in the temple as most of Yuna's other Aeons. Instead, she has fought within the Far Plane in Chapter 5, on the way to the final battle with Shuyin. In Final Fantasy XI, Shiva is one of the celestial avatars, representing the ice element. Shiva began as the young child queen of a southern kingdom in vana'diel, and although she was beloved, a faction of nobles supported her uncle that had been regent before her. A coup was staged, and Shiva was banished to the wintry Northlands alone. A group of loyalists attempted to save her, but when they found Shiva, she was frozen in a block of ice. The goddess Altana, moved by Shiva's fate, transformed her into the avatar of ice. Summoners earn the ability to summon Shiva by completing the quest Trial of Ice. Players must venture into the region Feyin in the Cloister of Frost to face Shiva Prime. When she is defeated, the player earns the Whisper of Frost as a token of victory, and it can be returned to Gulmama to unlock Shiva to summon. Final Fantasy XII uses the names of recurring summons for its airships, and the Shiva is a ship in the 8th Arcadian Fleet, commanded by Judge Geese. In Revenant Wings, Shiva is a ranged water elemental summon, one of two rank 3 summons alongside Famfrit. The rank 1 and rank 2 summons are named Shivan and Shiva, and are described as being Shiva's child and consort. Shiva is Snow's eidolon in Final Fantasy XIII, and the first one the player battles. Shiva in this saga is represented by a pair of sisters, Styria and Nyx, whose names are Latin for icicle and snow. When Snow summons them, inscriptions in Etro script appear around the sphere of ice that refer to the sisters as twin rulers on icy thrones, alluding to the backstory of Shiva in Final Fantasy XI. In battle, Styria is a ravager and medic who attacks with ice magic and heals Snow, and Nyx is a commando who uses physical attacks. In their Gestalt mode, the two sisters combine into a motorcycle that Snow rides, leaving ice in their wake. The Shiva sisters play a minimal role in other entries in the Lightning Saga. A different colored set of Shiva sisters fight Caius in Valhalla in 13.2, possibly a Chaos or Twilight incarnation of them like Bahamut or Odin, and in one of the game's endings Snow rides the sisters in their Gestalt mode when he saves Noel and Sarah from Alyssa. In Lightning Returns, Snow summons the sisters to aid Lightning in the final confrontation with Vana'diel, and they bid farewell to the party alongside the other Eidolons as they leave to the new world. Shiva plays a major role in the Heavensward expansion of Final Fantasy XIV. Legends tell of an Alesan maiden named Shiva from the city-state of Ishgard, who fell in love with the dragon Hysvelgr. Desiring to be with him always, she convinced the dragon to devour her so her spirit would always be with him, and their union ushered in peace between Ishgard and the dragons. Centuries later, this peace has crumbled, and Ishgard is at war with the dragons of the Dravanian Horde. The Ishgardians demonize Shiva, but the Harriers, a group allied with the Dravanians, worship her as a saint. The leader of the Harriers, Ysael, summons Shiva's essence within herself and transforms into Shiva, but is defeated by the Warrior of Light and reverts back. Ysael later aids the Warrior of Light in trying to negotiate a peace between the humans and dragons, but when she meets Hysvelgr and claims to be Shiva reborn, he reveals the Shiva she became is not the true Shiva, just an idea of what the Harriers envisioned Shiva as, and he wants nothing to do with her. When the warrior and their allies fly to the floating continent of Azizlat seeking the eyes of the dragon Nidhogg, Ysael makes peace with Hysvelgr and rides him into battle, transforming into Shiva again to attack the Gallian Empire's airship. Though she is able to aid the warrior in reaching the floating continent, Ysael is wounded in the battle and perishes. In the Shadowbringers expansion, the warrior travels to the First, a parallel version of Eorzea that had been destroyed by a flood of light from the creature Eden. As part of a plan to restore the world's aether and bring it back to life, new primals of the elements must be chosen. Rhine, the parallel version of Menphilia, heals the story of Ysael and volunteers to become the avatar of the new incarnation of Shiva. Although the player can fight both incarnations of Shiva, currently there is no way for the players to summon either, making this a rare occasion where Shiva cannot be acquired as a summon despite appearing in the game. Shiva in Final Fantasy XV is one of the Astrals, the Glacian, and is known as a goddess of cold and death. According to legend, in ancient times she spurned humanity, but seeing the compassion of Ifrit towards them when he gave them fire, she fell in love with him and shared his empathy to them. When the rising Solheim Empire spurred the Astrals, Ifrit grew enraged and turned on them, and Shiva and the Astrals were forced to destroy him to prevent him from scourging humanity. Shiva eventually took the form of Gentiana and became an attendant of House Tenebrae. When the Niflheim Empire found Ifrit and Odin infected him with the Star Scourge, Shiva awoke and began going to Niflheim to save him. Using weaponry designed by Odin, the Empire killed Shiva in her giant celestial form, but she persisted in mortal form as Gentiana. The desert where she was struck down became a frigid wasteland, with her corpse visible by passing trains. Throughout Final Fantasy XV, Gentiana appears to Noctis and Luna to relay messages between them. When Noctis and his friends pass through Gralea to Niflheim, Gentiana reveals her true form as Shiva when she saves Noctis from Odin by freezing him solid, and grants Noctis the Trident of the Oracle. At this time Shiva becomes available as a summon to be called into battle, where she creates many copies of herself that circle the enemy, creating a storm of freezing wind. At the end of the game, when the infected Ifrit battles Noctis, Shiva appears to freeze him solid and destroy him, sending her beloved back to his sleep. As one of the most famous summons, Shiva appears in virtually every Final Fantasy title that has some sort of summoning mechanics. These include Tactics, Tactics Advance, Type 0, Dimensions, Dissidia NT, Opera Omnia, Brave Exvius, Explorers, World of Final Fantasy, and many others. While her past designs are often reused in spin-offs that allude specifically to previous games, her Final Fantasy X design is reused most often and not always specifically associated with that game. It serves as the basis for her appearances in Theatrhythm and Record Keeper, and Maya can summon this incarnation of Shiva in Mobius Final Fantasy. World of Final Fantasy has an alternate incarnation of Shiva called Shiva Ixion, based on her Final Fantasy XIII design but as a lone figure instead of sisters, and she can still transform into an icy motorcycle. There is also a male incarnation of Shiva called Chivalry that fancies himself a superhero, and he is a counterpart to a female incarnation of Ifrit named Ifrita. In the anime Final Fantasy Unlimited, Shiva is summoned by the soil-charged triad Forest Green, Maiden White, and Ice Blue, and appears as a giant growth of ice with a humanoid figure frozen at the front. Thank you to everyone for watching. Remember to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe to see more Final Fantasy content in the future.